After 5 years of helping his wife's company go public, she wanted to give his position as general manager to her crush. Her reason was that when she had fainted and was hospitalized before, she had kept hearing her late mother's voice. After she woke up, her mother told her that in the future, her husband would scheme to take all her wealth, ultimately pushing her to her death. Her mother wouldn't lie to her, so she needed to act first. Matteo was stunned because what his wife, Isabella, said were all events from his past life. However, the husband she spoke of who would allegedly harm her wasn't him, but her crush, Hugo. I was listening to my secretary report on the project progress when the office door was suddenly slammed open. Isabella stomped in wearing 10-centimeter high heels, and before Matteo could even raise a smile, her slap landed heavily on his face. The force was so strong it made his head snap to the side. "Matteo, in my company, I gave you the position of general manager through the back door, and you're having an affair with my secretary? Has your conscience been eaten by a dog?" Her chest heaved with anger, and her eyes were filled with disappointment and fury. He hastily explained, his voice full of panic. "Isabella, you must have been deceived." Matteo glanced over at Hugo, who was standing behind her. This man was once his greatest rival, and only after he went abroad was Matteo able to marry Isabella. Isabella scoffed. "My mother told me everything. When and where you did unspeakable things, and she described it all clearly." A while ago, Isabella had suddenly fainted out of nowhere, and Hugo, who had just returned to the country, happened to be the one who rushed her to the hospital. Since then, she kept claiming she could hear her late mother's voice in her mind. Isabella loved her mother more than anything, and whatever her mother said, she believed without question, but something felt off to Matteo. He frowned, feeling wronged. "Isabella, you'd rather believe some mysterious voice in your head than trust me?" Hugo snickered from the side, casually tossing a stack of photos on the desk. "Why don't you take a look at these?" In the photos, Matteo appeared intimately close to his secretary, and the images were utterly unpleasant to look at. "Impossible. These photos must have been photoshopped," he protested loudly, but Isabella didn't listen, immediately calling in bodyguards. "Matteo, if you betray me, you'll pay the price." Her voice was as cold as ice. The bodyguards surged toward him, and Hugo seized the chance to wrap his arm around her shoulders, his eyes flashing with malice. "Isabella, you're too soft-hearted. I heard Matteo loves to dive. Why don't we?" His gaze lingered on his legs. "Give him a lesson he'll never forget, and teach him a good lesson." Isabella's eyes followed his, and at that moment, Matteo felt utter despair. He was beaten without the ability to fight back, only able to plead helplessly. "Isabella, listen to me. You can't." For her, he had once given up the opportunity to go abroad and become a professional diver. At that time, she had held his hand, her eyes full of tenderness. "One day, I will help you achieve your dreams." But now, she coldly uttered a single word: "beat." A heavy club struck his calf, and the sharp pain overwhelmed his entire body. In fact, all these years, he hated Hugo, not just because he was his rival. Only Matteo knew how terrifying he was in his past life. In his past life, he had fought hard to get a chance to study abroad, only to return and find that Isabella had married Hugo and had children. He planned to quietly bless them, but when he came back again, it was to attend Isabella's funeral. It turned out that Hugo had married her only for the Mu family's inheritance. He had killed Isabella's brother and after obtaining the inheritance, had an affair with his secretary. Isabella was so emotionally shattered that she eventually chose to commit suicide by wrist cutting. Matteo was filled with hatred, doing everything in his power to get Hugo imprisoned, but he collapsed in front of Isabella's gravestone. When he woke up, he found himself back in the day when he had chosen to study abroad. This time, he gave up the opportunity for her, and that's how he ended up with Isabella. He wanted to warn her about Hugo, but every time he tried to bring up the events of his past life, some force stopped him. Gradually, he stopped mentioning it. When Matteo opened his eyes again, he was in the hospital, and a sharp pain throbbed in his leg. Seeing the evidence of cheating on the bedside table, something suddenly clicked in his mind, and his eyes brightened. When Isabella came in, he picked up the photos. "My voice, that's not me, Isabella. Don't you remember? I'm allergic to alcohol." The him in the photos was drinking, which was clearly a loophole. He could see Hugo's face immediately darkening, just as he thought. It wasn't him behind this. Isabella's expression wavered for a moment, but Hugo immediately spoke up. Isabella, who knows if he's really allergic to alcohol? If he could deceive you for so many years, he must have ulterior motives. Why don't we give him some alcohol now and test him in front of us? Matteo looked at Isabella with all his hope, hoping to see even a trace of pity in her eyes, but she simply smiled lightly at Hugo. Sure. A few bodyguards brought alcohol closer, and despite his desperate struggles, they forced an entire bottle down his throat. He gagged and tried to vomit it out, but it was too late. His body started to burn, and he trembled uncontrollably. Finally, he saw a flicker of concern in Isabella's eyes before being rushed into the operating room for emergency treatment. When he came out, the doctor angrily reprimanded Hugo. The patient just had bone surgery. How could you give him alcohol? You almost killed him. Hugo shook his head innocently, but Isabella coldly replied, Well, he didn't die, did he? As he wearily closed his eyes, a familiar voice echoed in his ear. This Matteo is definitely pretending. He just wants to swallow the Mu family's fortune later. Isabella Mu, don't be soft-hearted. It was Isabella's mother's voice, but what she said next plunged him into an ice-cold pit. She said that the two childhood sweethearts Isabella had loved the wrong one. The first childhood sweetheart would swallow the family fortune and force her to take her own life. The second childhood sweetheart, in order to avenge her, wore himself out and ultimately died from illness in front of her tombstone. Matteo suddenly understood. The voice of Mu's mother was referring to his past life. She had mistaken him for Hugo from his previous life. He tried to reach out to Isabella to explain, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't make a sound. After hearing her mother's words, Isabella forcefully shook off his hand and left with Hugo. He stubbornly sat in a wheelchair and returned home, wanting to clarify things. But as soon as he opened the door, a picture frame flew toward him, and blood immediately poured from his forehead. He stared blankly at the shattered wedding photo on the floor. The once happy smiles in the photo were now torn apart. Isabella's face was cold, her eyes filled with disgust. How dare you come back? The voice of Mu's mother echoed again. Well done, Isabella. She should be with Hugo. This scumbag needs to leave and stop coveting the Mu family's wealth. Hearing this, Isabella directly threw his wedding ring into the trash can. Matteo, you've gone to great lengths for my family's money. No, Isabella, he wanted to explain, but not a single word came out. At that moment, several shareholders arrived. They began listing all the ways he had used his position to embezzle and take bribes. Even Isabella's secretary was kneeling on the floor, crying. President Mu, it was Matteo? He threatened me that if I didn't cooperate, I would never make it in this industry. My sister is waiting for money to save her life. I'm truly at my wit's end. Sitting in the wheelchair, Matteo gazed at Isabella, his eyes full of pleading. He hoped she would trust him just once. Over the past 5 years, I've brought so much profit to the company. You know it in your heart. You also know my feelings for you. Give me a chance, and I will prove my innocence. But Mu's mother kept fanning the flames from the side, her tone sharp. Isabella, don't be soft-hearted. This type of man is the best at pretending. After hearing her mother's words, Isabella's eyes turned cold. Under the gaze of all the shareholders, she spoke decisively. From today, Matteo, you are no longer the general manager of the company. I don't want to see you in the company again, and we are getting a divorce. Without hesitation, she signaled the bodyguards to act. The bodyguards moved forward, forcibly took his wheelchair, and threw him outside like he was garbage. It was pouring rain outside. He lay on the ground, desperately trying to crawl toward the wheelchair, but Hugo had someone move the wheelchair farther away, teasing him like one might tease a dog. Matteo glared at him with all his hatred, only to see Hugo deliberately kiss Isabella on the cheek. At that moment, fury and despair overwhelmed him, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. The blood fell to the ground, quickly washed away by the rain, and he was completely drained of strength. Just then, an umbrella appeared above him. His personal butler had arrived. He looked at him with a sigh and said, Young master, don't cling to this any longer. Come back with me. How could he possibly covet the Mu family's fortune? He was the heir of the prestigious law family. It's just that because he wholeheartedly pursued his diving dream, his grandfather scolded him for being useless and told him that if he had the ability, he shouldn't rely on the law family name. That's how he ended up where he was today. In the past, both in this life and the previous one, when everyone thought he was being foolish by ignoring business for diving, only Isabella had supported him. The day he was about to give up diving, she gave him the latest diving gear and said, "Matteo, if you want to do it, then do it. I will always be behind you." She had always been like the sun, giving him the motivation to keep going. How could he let her be deceived, repeating the tragic fate from their past life? He had to make her see the truth, to deal a fatal blow to Hugo. He gathered evidence from all directions, but before he could act, he received a message from Isabella asking him to come back tomorrow. He arrived at the banquet with a nervous heart. The banquet hall was lively, bustling with people and a joyful atmosphere. He overheard someone whispering, "So it's Miss Moo and her husband's wedding anniversary." A glimmer of hope rose in his heart. Could it be that Isabella had discovered the truth and wanted to apologize to him? He cautiously pushed open the door, only to see Isabella and Hugo standing on stage. At that moment, Isabella's voice echoed clearly through the microphone, reaching everyone's ears. "Matteo cheated on my secretary, used his position to embezzle, and corrupted. My Moo family can no longer tolerate such a person." She coldly looked at him through the crowd. "From today, I, Isabella, and Matteo have nothing to do with each other." With that, she took Hugo's hand. "This is my fiancé, Hugo. He will be joining the Moo family and becoming the new general manager." Moo's mother's voice followed, choking with emotion as she wished Isabella a new life. In that moment, it felt as though the story he had desperately tried to change had ironically returned to its starting point, cruelly mocking his helplessness. "It can't be," he shouted loudly, and everyone's gaze fell on him. He turned his wheelchair and struggled to move in front of Isabella. "I have evidence that proves I am innocent. I didn't betray you, and I didn't abuse my power." Full of hope, he handed the documents to her, but Isabella just glanced at them indifferently. Hugo, standing beside her, spoke sarcastically. "Matteo, at this point, are you still struggling in vain?" Matteo became agitated, pointing at Hugo. "It's all you're doing. Those photos are photoshopped, and you bribed the shareholders. Isabella, you have to believe me." Suddenly, cold red wine splashed onto his white shirt, silencing the words he hadn't finished speaking. Isabella slowly put down her wine glass, her gaze cold. "Get out and don't ever let me see you again." Amidst the mocking laughter from the crowd, he left in disgrace. His body uncontrollably drifted back to the Moo family's garden. Woof! His dog, Bruno, whom he had raised himself, seemed to sense his despair and ran over to nuzzle him. He forced a weak smile. "Don't worry, Daddy will take you with me." Just then, he heard Isabella's playful and coquettish, "Careful, if you're too rough, others will notice." "My swollen lips. Even better. It will show everyone you belong to me." Hugo's voice followed. He froze in place. "Are you still jealous?" "I've already announced your identity to everyone," Isabella responded. Hugo was displeased. "But Matteo, All right," Isabella interrupted, holding him. "You know that even though I'm with him, the one I've always loved is you. If you hadn't gone abroad back then, how could I have used Matteo as your substitute?" Hearing those words, his mind went blank. So, even without Moo's mother's instigation, Isabella and he would have still ended up here. In her heart, there was always only space for Hugo. All those details he had overlooked before now stung like needles in his heart. At their wedding, Isabella made him wear a suit style he wasn't comfortable with, and it turned out that was Hugo's favorite. The traditional Chinese decoration they originally planned for their home was changed to French style because Hugo had studied in France. Even in bed, the way she looked at him was as if she were looking through him at Hugo. Isabella smiled shyly. "When my brother comes back, we can all be together as a family." A family, he smiled bitterly to himself, his fingers trembling as he turned his wheelchair, wanting to leave this place of heartbreak. The wheelchair rolled over the dry leaves, making a rustling sound. Isabella and Hugo noticed his presence at the same time. He heard Moo's mother's sorrowful voice. "Isabella doesn't know yet, but your brother will never return. That scumbag husband killed him in a car accident to take the family fortune." Isabella froze, turning to look at him. "Brother, is he dead?" In this life, her brother did indeed have a car accident, though it was an accident. His leg injury was so severe that he couldn't stand. In order to treat him, Mateo had gone back to ask his grandfather for help. He knelt in the ancestral hall all night before his grandfather agreed to find a doctor who could treat her brother's leg injury. But before he could explain, Isabella rushed toward him with hate on her face. "Mateo, you said you found a doctor to treat my brother's leg, that he was being treated in a private hospital? Where's my brother?" Isabella didn't care about his leg injury and forcefully pushed him to the ground. Bruno barked at her, but the bodyguards forcibly dragged him away. He gasped for breath. "He's in the private hospital." Hugo pressed down on Isabella's shoulder. "Isabella, please grieve in peace." The two voices intertwined, and Isabella only believed Hugo's lies. "Mateo." Isabella clenched her fists tightly, her knuckles turning white. "I can accept you betraying me, coveting the family fortune, but how could you go after my brother? Do you have no conscience? Isabella, you can't let him deceive you." He pushed himself up with his hands, speaking quickly. "If I really had killed your brother, why would I have gone to such lengths to find a private hospital for him? That would have been pointless, wouldn't it?" But he was still too naive because Isabella didn't love him. She didn't believe him. No matter how much evidence he presented, it couldn't compete with Hugo's casual words. Isabella lifted her foot and stomped on his wound. Hearing his suppressed grunt, she laughed through her tears. "Your brother, such a proud person, was more devastated than you when he found out he couldn't walk. Why don't you try the feeling of losing your legs forever?" With one kick, she knocked him to the ground, then turned to look at Hugo. "Hugo, doesn't the new drug you developed still need test subjects?" She glanced at his pathetic form, a cold smile curling on her lips. Mateo would be perfect. He was utterly drained, unable to do anything but watch her turn and leave. Under the blinding lights in the operating room, a slender needle repeatedly pierced his knee. He could no longer feel his legs. "That stray dog of yours, it's yours, right?" Hugo, wearing a mask, his eyes full of malice, said, "Too bad it ate the ham sausage laced with drugs. It probably won't last much longer." The words struck him like a heavy hammer to the heart. He lost it, lunging at him and pushing him to the ground, his fists landing again and again. In the next moment, several people rushed in and pulled him away. Isabella, with a pained look on her face, gently cradled Hugo's injured face, then turned to the bodyguards and ordered, "Beat him to the brink of death, but don't let him die too easily." The dull thud of the iron rods hitting his body was the last thing he heard before he saw Bruno covered in blood, struggling to crawl toward him. He was locked away in a dark, windowless room. He didn't know how long passed before he heard Isabella's footsteps. She looked down at him from above, her eyes filled with mockery. "Mateo, you brought this on yourself. I originally planned to peacefully part ways with you after Hugo returned, to never disturb each other again. It's your greed that led to this." Her words made him feel as though all the effort he'd put in both lives was a joke. After saying this, Isabella turned to leave, but he called out to her. "Isabella, I hope you won't regret this." She sneered. "What do I have to regret?" He raised his arm to shield his eyes and smiled silently. "Then I wished you would walk toward that inevitable end. This time, I wouldn't even attend your funeral." For some reason, after hearing Mateo's words, a faint sense of unease lingered in Isabella's heart. However, when she heard her mother's affirmation and saw Hugo waving at her from a distance, she tried to calm herself. Mateo was clearly doing this on purpose. He had done so many bad things. How could she regret it? But what if those things weren't actually done by him? "Isabella, let's go." Hugo's cold hand gripped hers, and Isabella snapped back to her senses. What was she even thinking? Hugo would never deceive her. He was the person she had loved for many years. Isabella kept telling herself this until the next day, when a phone call from the bodyguard came. "President Mu, Mr. Mateo has passed away due to a severe allergic reaction to the medication. Dead." In a moment of distraction, Isabella accidentally cut off the bud of the pink rose. She lowered her eyelids, trying to hide the panic in her heart. "I see. Then just bury him however you like." After all, Mateo was an orphan and no one would attend his funeral. However, from that moment on, Isabella began to have nightmares. She dreamt that after her death, someone knelt at her grave overnight. Their hair turned white, and they held a photo of her, one she had cherished in life. As they walked toward the sea, she heard that person standing by the sea smile gently at the photo of herself. "Isabella, I brought you to see the sea." Waking up from the dream, Isabella, almost as if guided by fate, asked Hugo, "Do you like the sea?" Hugo answered without hesitation, "I don't know how to swim. How could I like the sea?" This response left Isabella feeling even emptier. She placed her hand over her chest and found her heart racing faster than usual. At that moment, Hugo kissed her forehead. "I have a business trip." "Another trip?" Isabella frowned. Since Hugo married her and officially became the CEO of the group, he had been frequently traveling for work. "Yeah, after all, someone has to work to support the family. But you wouldn't understand, would you?" Hugo wasn't different, but his words made Isabella feel uneasy inside, because Matteo would never speak like that. Not only would he say, "Because it's your company, I must do well to prove to the shareholders that your choice was the right one," but he would also make time every day to chat with her, to keep her company and alleviate her boredom. What's going on? Why am I thinking about Matteo again? Is it because his death anniversary is approaching? Isabella looked out at the corner of the window where a cluster of camellias had quietly bloomed, feeling a little dazed. It had been over a year since Matteo had left. "It turns out I've been asleep for more than a year." Wrapped in a thick blanket, he looked through the window at the falling snow outside. If it were before, he would have eagerly grabbed his snow gear and headed out. But now, not only could he no longer stand, even the slightest chill made him shiver in fear. He looked down at his legs and the door behind him opened. "Young master, you've just woken up. Please don't catch a cold." He smiled faintly. "Butler, thank you for saving my life." In fact, he should have died a year ago today. It was the butler who noticed something was wrong. He found Bruno's lifeless body by the trash can outside the Move family gate, which led them to search for him. When his grandfather learned of his plight, he was furious and called the world's best doctors to treat him. On the first day he woke up, he left him with a single sentence: "Take revenge for your own grievances." Hugo's disgusting face and Isabella's indifferent expression flashed in his mind, and his fists clenched tightly. The butler handed him a stack of documents. "Young master-law, these are all evidence of Hugo's affair." He looked at the documents, thinking, how could Isabella have such poor judgment? "If this is the path you've chosen, then I'll make sure you see everything clearly. Find an opportunity to take Isabella to this place." Sitting in his wheelchair on the second floor, he looked down at the lively dancing below. His eyes quickly locked onto Isabella, who was walking through the crowd with a frown. She must be confused as to why the investors had chosen this place. Isabella sat down at the designated spot, and her calm expression shattered when she saw Hugo surrounded by women. He heard Moo's mother's familiar voice. How could this happen? Isn't Hugo supposed to only love Isabella? How could he do something like this? In the eye of the storm, Isabella stood up, expressionless, and slowly walked toward Hugo. Hugo, enjoying the attention from the women, still hadn't realized the gravity of the situation and said something without thinking. "My wife? She's just damaged goods. If I knew she was the daughter of the Mu family before I went abroad, I would have taken all of their fortune. But I tell you, her ex-husband was the real fool. He stayed at Mu's for 5 whole years only to honestly protect Isabella's inheritance." What a joke. The more Isabella heard, the more she collapsed, her body trembling, her eyes turning red from the effort of holding back tears. He deserves to die? It turned out that Isabella at some point had grabbed a bottle of wine and smashed it over Hugo's head. One outburst wasn't enough, so she did it again. Isabella. Wait. Hugo tried to explain, but was hit again. The scene erupted into chaos, and Hugo, furious, grabbed Isabella's wrist. Enough. Isabella laughed and cried at the same time, her once perfect makeup now smeared. "Hugo, look at what I've become. All because of you." He had forced the men who loved her to death, only to welcome the wolf into her home. "Why should I care?" Hugo cursed, shoving Isabella away and then watching her broken, empty expression with a cold smirk. "You're the one who killed Matteo after all. He tried so many times to show you the truth, but you chose to blindly trust me." No. Isabella was devastated by his words, swaying on her feet, tears falling helplessly. From the second floor, he simply turned his gaze away, indifferent. Seeing Isabella's misery didn't make him feel any happier. In fact, it only made his leg pain worse. Turning his head, he realized it had started snowing outside. A few days later, "Young master, I heard that Isabella is trying to get a divorce." The butler approached him and whispered in his ear. But it seems like it didn't work. Over the past year, Hugo has already infiltrated the Mu family's wealth, and he's been using it to threaten Isabella. He casually looked at the fish swimming in the aquarium. Hugo? Of course he won't let it go. Either it's time for the Law family to hold a banquet and watch the fun. The butler was quick. Isabella received the invitation, but she secretly tore it up and threw it away. Still, Hugo with his keen eyes noticed. Ever since the affair was exposed, Hugo no longer bothered to hide it. He wore various perfumes every day, but Isabella couldn't divorce him. All she could do was cry in front of Mateo's photo day after day. She hated her own stupidity, repeatedly stepping on Mateo's trust. She also hated the voice of her mother. Even though Mu's mother constantly comforted her, saying, "Isabella, don't be sad," she often threw things at the air. "Liars. You liar. It's all your fault." And today, once again, she cried in front of the photo, only for Hugo to kick the door open and drag her out. "Why did you tear up the invitation to Mateo's family behind my back, huh?" Hugo's face was cold. "Isabella, you're still being naughty." As he spoke, he noticed the photo Isabella was tightly clutching in her hand. He laughed mockingly. "Mateo? What? Still thinking about your ex-husband? Too bad you didn't know that before he died, he was still calling out your name. Oh, by the way, at that time you and I were in bed." Isabella was harshly provoked and covered her ears, retreating constantly. "Shut up." "I won't shut up." Hugo grabbed her hand away. "Do you remember the dog Mateo loved the most? You threw it to me to use as an experiment, and I tortured it until it was on the brink of death. But it could have lived. You didn't care about its injuries just because it was Mateo's dog, and you had someone throw it away. Its body was left in the trash heap, and by the time it was found, it was nothing but bones." Isabella collapsed, fainting from the shock. At the same time, crack. Hearing the sound from the other side, he gripped the pen so tightly that it broke in his hand, cutting his skin. Bruno. When he woke up, he had asked the butler about it. After hesitating for a few seconds, he simply told him. It passed away peacefully. But he never expected it to suffer until its last second. Isabella had been forced to attend Mateo's family banquet. Despite her carefully applied makeup, the fatigue on her face couldn't be concealed. He hid in the shadows, guessing that she would likely meet that person soon. Sure enough, when Isabella turned a corner, she bumped into someone. "Sorry, Isabella." She looked up in surprise. This was the person she thought she would never meet again. Isabella's voice trembled. "Brother? You didn't die? What are you talking about?" Her brother looked confused. "After I had the car accident, wasn't my brother-in-law the one who took me to get treatment? I still need to thank him. You don't know how hard it was to get an appointment with the doctor he found. You also don't know how much effort he put in to find him. You need to treat him well." "Wait, why are you crying?" Her brother watched Isabella, who was crying uncontrollably, feeling somewhat at a loss. She tightly pressed her hand against her chest, where the pain made it impossible for her to stand up straight. "I just feel I'm such a fool." Meanwhile, Hugo was still searching for Isabella everywhere. The lights gradually dimmed, and the host stepped onto the stage. "Let's welcome President Mateo." I sat in my wheelchair, being pushed onto the stage, looking down at Hugo, who was staring up at me, dumbfounded, from the crowd. I silently said, "Long time no see." However, more excited than him was Isabella. She couldn't even hold the glass in her hand steady. She stared at me, her heart filled with fear, afraid that this scene before her was just an illusion, a dream. I said a few words briefly and then left the stage as if I hadn't noticed the two people below, completely losing their composure. It was Isabella who quickly caught up with me. "Is it really you, Mateo?" she asked cautiously. I turned around and asked mockingly, "What? Am I still alive and you're disappointed?" Isabella's eyes were swollen from crying, and in her emotional turmoil, she couldn't even complete a sentence. "No, But I wasn't interested in listening to her continue crying. I was about to leave when she stopped me, full of regret. "Mateo, can I ask you one last question?" The return of Isabella's brother meant that Hugo's future in the Mu family was completely over. When he was thrown out of the Mu family, I was standing on the roadside watching. The next moment, he was stuffed into a sack and thrown into a warehouse. When Hugo woke up, I was contemplating which tool would be more convenient to use. In the end, I chose a syringe filled with an unknown liquid. This is the latest development. I heard that once injected, it only takes an hour before you turn into a puddle of blood. I'm quite curious to see it for yourself. You're insane. Hugo kept backing away, cowering in the corner, trembling. Mateo, I know you hate me, but it has nothing to do with me. Go take it out on Isabella. It's all her fault, I retorted. But wasn't it you who caused Moo's mother's voice? How do you know? Hugo stopped mid-sentence and saw the smile on my face. You tricked me. He said it as if knowing his own fate. He became reckless. Yes, it was me. His face twisted in rage. In the last life, I was glorious, and yet for that, Isabella, you came after me like a mad dog for revenge. In this life, you won't let me go? You tricked me abroad before my memory returned. Did you think you were a good person? So of course I wasn't going to hold back. When Isabella came to pick me up at the airport, I injected her with a new type of hallucinogen, and in the following days, I kept adding the drug to her food. Isabella is really stupid, believing everything without a second thought. Mateo, even though you threw away your life for Isabella in the last life, what does it matter in this life? He still doesn't know anything and is blindly trusting me. I quietly waited for him to finish speaking, then turned to ask the person behind me. Did you hear that? This is the truth you wanted. Hugo's expression twisted as he stared wide-eyed at Isabella, who was slowly stepping out. Without hesitation, she slapped him across the face. Then picking up the syringe, she plunged it into him while he begged. You bastard. You'll never die in peace. Hugo, terrified, lost control of himself, curling up and cursing us with the most vicious words. But he waited a long time and nothing happened. Just as he lifted his head in relief, police arrived. Mr. Hugo, you are suspected of intentional murder, leaking business secrets, and several other crimes. Please come with us. Isabella stared at me in complete astonishment. I am a law-abiding citizen. I watched as Hugo, with a look of relief, followed the police out, a cold smile forming in my heart. Sometimes living is more painful than dying. In prison, those more vicious and ruthless than you will teach you what it means to be human. I thought for a moment and remembered that there was an experiment fanatic in there. Hugo, the pain I endured, you will experience it too. I clapped my hands, ignoring Isabella's gaze, and prepared to leave. Mateo, bang! The proud Miss Moo, who had always been so dignified, actually knelt down. Isabella Moo knelt on the ground, pleading for me to turn back. I stopped, but still had my back to her. Isabella, you're just as selfish as Hugo. After Hugo went abroad, you could have chosen to leave with him, or you could have chosen to start a new life. I scoffed, full of disdain. But you chose to use me as a substitute. So now your sadness? Are you upset because you realize you've wronged me, or because you can't bear the fact that Hugo betrayed you? Isabella seemed to be choked, struggling to speak for a long time. Forget it. But I smiled faintly, and under the look of her fading expression, I continued. Because I don't care anymore. I turned my wheelchair and left, hearing her weak voice from behind. Mateo, I'm sorry. Sorry? Making her pay some price would be more convincing. I personally took action to sever the Moo family's development path, watching as Isabella dejectedly moved out of that villa full of memories. That's my house. The people who came to take the house were merciless, throwing her belongings at her. TCH. Miss Moo, you've gone bankrupt. Wake up. Isabella stared down in confusion and saw that it was an album I had left behind. The wind blew it open, and the first page was the wedding photo that she had personally torn. She looked around in a daze, large tears falling from her eyes, murmuring my name. I closed the car window. Let's go. But Isabella locked her gaze on me, rushing after the car and desperately banging on the window. Mateo, is that you? Her eyes held both regret and an unspoken resentment. How could you do this to me? Finally, she collapsed to the ground, unwillingly questioning me, and I just found it laughable. The Isabella the first once loved was long gone. As for why I chose to do this to her, the most despairing thing for a high and mighty lady is to be reduced to someone struggling for 3 meals a day. Isabella, this is the last gift I'll give you.